If you don't know who Creative Edinburgh are, we are an organisation that supports freelancers and small micro businesses in Edinburgh. We run events, mentoring and resources, and advocate for the freelance community. So we've got Ola here, who give us a wave. There we are. She's our executive director. I'm the program assistant stepping in for Zoe today, who is working on her own freelance work. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Marian and Emma, like Maid Marian. I'm going to hand over to Marian and Emma, who are going to introduce today's talk and start us off.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. So I am Marian Blythe.
I'm Emma. Hello, everyone.
And we are Blunt Knife Co., which is a little shop and event space in Newtown on Thistle Street that supports and promotes creative women and people of marginalised genders. We do that by selling stuff in our little shop and doing little events in the back room, and just, helping out little independent makers.
Yeah, so I am going to just introduce Rachel, and then we're going to get into the chat. So Rachel Ashenden is an arts writer and independent researcher who specialises in the feminist avant-garde. She is the co-founder and editor of The Debutante, a magazine dedicated to the lives and legacies of women surrealists. Through her newsletter, Interior Scroll, she shares her personal reactions to contemporary art. Thank you so much for being with us, Rachel. We're really excited to do this chat, so we're going to jump in, I think.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I interrupted you. Nice to meet everyone.
So I thought we could start by you just telling us a bit about your own career trajectory and in terms of what you wanted to do and what you actually have done and where you are now, that kind of thing.
Cool. Yes, I wouldn't necessarily call it a straightforward career trajectory as such, as I'm still continually working things out as I go. But I always knew that I wanted to prioritise writing about art since I was around 20. And initially I wanted to do a PhD in art history, but I didn't get the funding back then. And then I fell into a career in communications after my master's, which at first wasn't art related at all and was actually in politics. And in the first year or so of working in comms, I knew I needed to do something to keep that passion for art writing going. So I teamed up with my friend Molly, who is equally passionate about my research specialism in surrealism, which I know is quite niche. And we started our own magazine called The Debutante. And The Debutante is dedicated to amplifying the lives and legacies of women surrealists and gender fluid surrealists. And each issue is themed, and we seek out artists and writers at various stages in their career. Some are famous, some are just emerging. And alongside that, we also host a series of really exciting events across the UK. Most recently, we had a BFI funded surrealist film programme called Electric Muses. And some of the films that we programmed were silent, so in collaboration with Cinetopia, who are also based in Edinburgh. They're like a film networking society. They're brilliant. We commissioned 2 amazing musicians to compose and perform a live score. And I guess through The Debutante, which is a self-published magazine, I've been able to foster really amazing relationships and connections with artists that I think I probably wouldn't be able to do in a traditional work setting. And since I've started the magazine, my communications work is also now art focused as well. But as well as making the magazine, I write exhibition reviews, essays, and interview features for a handful of publications on a freelance basis. And this is just my favourite ever thing to do, and it brings me so much joy.
Thank you. That's a brilliant recap. It's so interesting that so many people come to the arts through communications and through doing like media journalism studies and things like that. I think those are really valuable skills, particularly with what we're talking about today, which kind of brings me to my next sort of our next question about where we sort of wanted to get your opinion and thing is that we're talking about this talk is about gatekeepers and self-publishing and trying to get maybe subversive or left of center work into the mainstream. So I wanted to just quickly talk about old versus new media, and by old media I'm talking about traditional media forms, so the big publishers, newspapers, the big art galleries and all that kind of thing. So back in the day, which is a blanket term, those places were the reputable places to get your work shown and seen, but they also have these huge restrictions on whose work gets to be seen. So when the internet came about and all of the apps and tools that you can use to self-publish happened, it technically removed those gatekeepers, but it has also created this huge, messy space. So I guess we just wanted to sort of talk about how you navigate that space of old versus new, or even like whatever you, like your experience of old media or whatever.
Yeah, of course, that's a really good question. I think with like the influx of zine making, independent magazines and self-published books, and also Substack newsletters, which are like quickly becoming a really big online publishing tool, I really think that tide is turning when it comes to this traditional hierarchy between old versus new media, and it's also like paving the way for new voices. You know, if you look at your traditional newspapers, you'll have an art critic, you know, covering a specific area, but with if you're making your own magazine, you get to sort of insert yourself into that field in a really unique way. And the way I go about navigating that busy online space is by building a community of emerging arts writers on Instagram, which is my preferred social media channel because it's really visual. And I've made a load of friends through that app, and because I've been posting about my writing, I see what they're posting about, and also finding out about which publications to approach based on what they've written and their own styles. And you know, there's never any harm if you've built a relationship up with someone on social media, to slide into their DMs in a totally non-creepy way and ask for some pitching advice and recommendations. You could be like, oh, I've read your article, thought this was amazing. I've got something in a similar sort of area that I want to write about. Can you recommend any editors that might be up for this? And I've definitely learned a lot by building that community online.
That's such a valuable piece of advice of if it's seeing something that you would like to do or that's in your wheelhouse or whatever, and asking for advice, because if people don't have time to give you the advice, they will just say sorry, but maybe they can direct you somewhere or that kind of thing. And building community as well. I mean, obviously, like we're very community focused with what we do at Blunt Knife Co. And watching people make connections. I mean, we made a connection with you, which is brilliant. And and watching people get together and share skills in a valuable way.
And I guess on the back of that, even like if you pitch a story to an editor and they don't go for it, you know, 9 times out of 10, if they're not interested, they won't reply to you. But then you'll have some really good editors that will offer you feedback, and you can continue to build that relationship. They might be like, this isn't suitable for this issue or whatever, but I'd be interested if you went at it at this in this particular way another time, for instance. So I think always hold on to those relationships. and you're never pestering someone as well if you're sending a follow-up email for a pitch.
Awesome. Excuse me. So thinking about these kinds of things, in your opinion, what are actually the barriers to making money in the arts, and what's your experience with that?
I think it's quite a similar situation to what university staff have been facing, have been put through for a long time. Actually, I've got quite a few friends that work as early career academics, and I've been following the strike action quite recently, and I watched this really great interview with the General Secretary of the University and College Union, and they said that universities are businesses which are essentially exploiting the work of people who care, and people who are willing to offer their labour for free just because they're passionate about helping their students succeed. So like university staff might be marking essays or answering emails in their spare time just for free. And I think historically there's been quite a similar attitude towards freelance arts writing. But I do think the tide is turning, and that is becoming less and less acceptable to ask people to write something without a fee. And I've seen publications, being called out for that. So I think it is moving. It is just quite slow.
It's very much that where a lot of artists themselves now, it's not just the publishers that are wanting to pay artists, but artists themselves are able to say, well, actually, this is the fee that my time and expertise is worth, so I want to be paid that amount. And I think it's very hard to have the self-confidence to do that when you're an artist, because we all have imposter syndrome and all sorts of self-loathing issues being creative people. But
I feel that.
It's a therapy session, yes. But yeah, I think that's really important about the paid work aspect of things, particularly as a freelancer, to know what the freelance rates are. There's all those resources. Creative Edinburgh supplies a lot of those resources as well. Yeah, I
saw Creative Edinburgh posted, I think it was the other day, that you deserve to be paid for your work as an artist. And yeah, even just having that reminder is really good. So I have to remind myself as a writer as well, like, no, I'm not going to be asked to write a 2,000 word article if we haven't discussed fees in the first instance, because that's so much work.
I think at the start of freelance careers as well, where you're wanting to be published, so you will do a few things maybe for free, but it's also the importance of having those resources. And because when you're pitching something to a publisher, even if it's a small indie publisher, it's kind of like, well, I'm asking you if I can do this, so I should be doing it for free. But that's not the case.
Yeah. And I think it needs to be clear from the get-go.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
So we'll talk a bit more about self-publishing.
Yeah, let's do that. So what are some other kind of self-publishing options out there, ones that you're aware of, ones that you specifically chose, that kind of thing?
Yeah, shall I maybe talk more about self-publishing in general, and then I'll talk about the debutante and what I'm doing at the moment.
That would be great, yeah.
So I guess self-publishing is a way to share your writing without going down the traditional route of working with a publishing house. I guess it could be compared to podcasting in that no one stops you making it. And I think historically, because of that, it has some negative connotations, as it's seen as like there's less quality control over your writing. But there are some advantages in it, in that it also allows independent writers and editors to have more control over how their work is presented and eventually marketed. I would say it's good practice to hire an external proofreader and editor as well. And what I found is that while your book proposal or pitch might not neatly fall into a publishing house's vision, doesn't mean that what you have to say and research isn't important, or it's not unique, and that it needs to get out there. So you can build on the success of a self-published book as well in for a future book proposal if you want to go down the traditional publishing route. And so far I've used self-publishing to create the debutante, and it means we have total creative freedom over so many aspects of the magazine which we wouldn't if we formerly had a publisher. For instance, over design, which is so integral. I should have got some magazines to show you, don't have them to hand, which is so integral to an arts magazine. And we also have a growing customer demand as well. So people order from all over the world, and it's stocked and supported by really amazing independent bookshops, including Blunt Knife. So I've used self-publishing in that regard. Also, I've been using Substack, which you guys mentioned earlier, and I'm using that as a self-publishing tool to publish Interior Scroll, which features my personal responses to contemporary art and exhibitions. And at some point, I want to dedicate more time to making it a regular feed of content, but this isn't a huge priority for me at present. But it's an increasingly popular tool, and it's relatively low maintenance, and there's also an option for paid subscribers. And if your newsletter takes off, it can be really profitable, and also will provide you with a digital portfolio which is readily available, and that you can send to editors if you want to, pitch an article. You can be like, well, here is 10 newsletters that I've written recently that are basically essays about your subject area. So yeah, that's what I'm using at the moment.
And so did you choose Substack over, say, Blogger or Blogspot or whatever other?
Yeah, when I was studying, I had a blog, and I'm scared to look back at it, the URL, to see if it's still there, to be honest. I don't think I've archived it. Who knows what kind of cringy content's on there. But yeah, I'm moving towards Substack at the moment, just because I think it's more low maintenance in terms of, you don't have to regularly update the content management system, whereas I have to do that for the debutante, and that's quite a lot of admin. So it's really just easy to start a Word document with whatever you have to say, slot in your images, and just copy and paste it into your Substack. So I really like the format, actually.
So it's easy to use.
Yeah, 100%, and it's free to use, which is great.
That's what you were going to ask a question about funding.
I was, yeah. So just in terms of your other work with the debutante, I know that there's a team of you behind that, but I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the other elements of self-publishing in that regard. So funding and promotion, where you kind of have to do it all yourself, getting it out there and getting people to know about it.
Yeah, of course. So with the debutante, in terms of funding, to kick the magazine off, we did a Kickstarter, and I know it's quite a niche, but I think because it was that niche, it really tapped into some people's passions, and that funded the first print run, and we've been sort of self-sustainable since then. I think eventually would want to look at a more secure pot of funding, but at the moment it's fine how it is. I think it's quite tricky in terms of because unfortunately, like, funding in arts journalism is sparse, but it is there if you shop around, and before you pitch, if you hone in on your pitching skills, the paid opportunities will become more apparent. I think, you know, people are so driven to get a pitch accepted by a magazine that sometimes money isn't at the forefront of the conversation between the, you know, early career writer and the editor. But as we were sort of chatting about earlier, I think the best editors will be clear and transparent about this from the very beginning. And, you know, if you've built up a relationship with editors, you could say to them, I like this fee, it's not enough and I deserve to be paid more. And in the past, I have been had a few essays published without receiving fees, but I've always known this from the very beginning. And if you're going to do something on a voluntary basis, I just make sure you know what you're going to gain from this exposure as well. So, for example, if you publish a piece, what is that adding to your portfolio, and how can you use that piece as a strong example for your work later on as a paid piece? Can you use this, reuse this piece elsewhere, for example, in your own Substack newsletter, which I've done, and you can obviously get paid subscribers through that. And how is that publication going to amplify your work across their channels? Are they going to post about it or across social media? Will they be able to help you foster connections with other editors? One weird trend that I've noticed with a few publications is that they're asking for a fee so people pay to pitch, and I find this quite upsetting. I think it's really limits the diversity of the writers you're getting through as well. I find that very frustrating. Also, I guess in terms of what I'm working on at the moment, I'm currently writing a small arts book, which I'm doing sort of for my own pleasure in research interests. And I've been considering who to pitch it to. And I've been weighing up sort of the pros and cons of going with an indie publisher or self-publishing it through the skills I've gained from running the debutante. And although I wouldn't be getting advance if I self-publish, unless you find a pot of funding, I think it might be potentially more beneficial for me financially to sell the book directly in the long run, because you have more control over its look and feel, and then obviously you're responsible then for its marketing and the editing and the proofing, but at least you are paid directly whenever you make a sale.
And self-publishing can be a bit of a minefield relating to printers as well, because if you're self-publishing a physical book, I've seen a lot of cases where printers have not delivered, and then the people's books or whatever it was have had to sort of sit around for months and months while that is resolved. So asking for advice and finding out where other people get their work printed and that kind of thing is really valuable as well.
100%. I think that's a really good point, Marian. Like, even going along to like an independent bookshop or Blunt Knife and having a look at the self-published zines that are on display and how they've been printed is a really good shout, because often magazines, they'll include where they were printed, and if they're good quality, it's always worth like getting a quote from them. Also get quotes from several printers, because some can be extortionate.
Yeah, because it's not self-publishing it's low cost, so it is far more accessible, but you also want it to be good quality. You want it to look good, so it stands out in the sea of self-published stuff, and that goes for online as well. Maybe 0.00001% of creative people in the online space are going to become a name, And so it's like, what is the valuable thing that you can have online that will make you look fantastic when you're pitching to bigger things that lead to paid work? And that community thing as well, because maybe it's you know, you were talking about like finding people who are doing similar things or that you're interested in. So maybe if you are a writer or a visual artist and you want to put something online in a beautiful way that's maybe not a social media account or whatever, maybe you find a few other people who are doing work around your same theme, and you can then have a collective website or a collective location to share that work.
Yeah, I love that idea. That's great. Yeah.
I mean, crowdfunding as well is so good, because it's that finding people who are interested in what you want to do or have similar interests, and you can get them to help.
I actually have a question.
So the next question we have is, how has self-publishing helped in kind of overall your freelance career? And what are some of the benefits or pitfalls that you've experienced through that?
Yeah, I guess in terms of freelance art writing, I would say that don't be afraid to find your niche and run with it. I think as a freelancer, it's quite easy to accept every opportunity which comes your way, just because of the fluctuating nature of freelance work. But this can lead to burnout. So I think if you're juggling too much and someone has asked you to write something which is quite far removed from your specialism, you might consider saying no. But then on the flip side, I would say that sometimes the fluctuating, you know, nature of it can be quite demoralizing. But, you know, editors are inundated with pitches, so don't be offended if they don't get back to you. Some of them are really generous and will offer feedback, and obviously some will accept your pitches and you can go with it. Yeah.
I'm conscious that time is flying.
Oh yeah, of course.
And we've kind of covered sort of, I mean, you've given a lot of really fantastic advice, but are there any bits of advice that you would have for people who are starting out in the arts? Maybe they don't have links to art school background or you know, university, all those university links where people who can afford to study get those resources. Are there any specific pieces of advice?
Oh, it's going to sound like I have set this up, but I would really recommend like getting involved with, you know, a social enterprise like Blunt Knife. Glasgow Zine Library are amazing as well, with the opportunities and events they offer. Creative Edinburgh. So I think on that point, maybe just like trying to build up that community of writers who are local to you in your area, because they'll have those already established connections with editors. So they're, you know, a coffee with someone to befriend them and chat about your mutual interests will go a long way. Also have this amazing newsletter that I follow called I think it's called the Freelance Writer's Survival Guide. It's by someone who's written a book called The Pajama Myth, and it offers, you know, around like 10 writing jobs every week, and this person has gone through Twitter and found all the editors who are looking for pitches at the moment. I'll send a link to that newsletter. But it's really, I think it's really great that when people sort of come together and champion other people's work and want to support each other, rather than like it being based on this sort of competitiveness, because obviously freelance work can be quite sparse. So establishing a community, I think, is the best way to go about it.
I think another really important thing that creatives often forget is like looking at what is happening in the space. So, and it's not just like who are the influencers and who is doing something that's successful, but looking at everything, including the stuff that's maybe not great, because it's you're not just looking for what you would like to do, you're looking at what you maybe don't want to do as well. And so placing your work in the space, in the online space, or in the self-published like physical workspace as well.
Totally.
I really liked what you said about just reaching out to people and having a coffee with them and things like that, because I think, you know, a lot of writers are introverts and maybe a little bit of reticence of like putting themselves out there in that way. But I think that is the thing with self-publishing as opposed to traditional publishing or going through a publisher who will kind of organize all these things for you. You kind of do have to put yourself out there and make connections yourself and talk to people.
That's so true. I mean, I'm a total introvert, so having that coffee can be a bit exhausting. But sometimes you like limit it to an hour and then you can just retreat back to your writing room, your desk.
You've just got to put your hustle hat on and do some specific hours of hustling.
Exactly. But that's what I mean about like going to a low pressure space like Blunt Knife, you know, go along to like a zine making workshop or whatever, and you'll find like-minded individuals there as well that might have already, you know, self-published a series of books or whatever, and you can talk to them about your idea. I think that's always a good way to go about it.
Beautiful.
Love it. Yeah.
And so our last question for you, Rachel, is similarly, if there's any organizations or resources that you would recommend.
You did mention quite a few organizations. So.
And we didn't set up Blunt Knife Co. as a recommendation.
I can't think of any more off the top of my head.
No, that's okay. That's fine. I mean, certainly Creative Edinburgh is a fantastic resource for freelance artists particularly. So we've already nailed it.
I'm thinking now maybe my next newsletter will be about self-published books or magazines that I really admire based in Edinburgh, so maybe some more connections and recommendations will come out of that.
That is the thing, there's so much local stuff happening and I think a lot of it can get lost and you might not find it. So reaching out, seeing what's happening in your local space physically is really good.
Definitely.
And the Freelancers Guide that Creative Scotland published, which I can't remember, it's written by Heather Parry and Maria Stoy and illustrated by Maria Stoy, which is a free resource which you can get from Creative Edinburgh, I believe. You can get it from Blunt Knife Co. and a couple of other places too.
I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that before, but we just wanted to mention it again in case anyone hadn't. I think that brings us to the end of our questions. So, Caitlin, we might hand it back to you. But Rachel, thank you so much for chatting to us.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks.
We've got a couple of questions actually. Before we do the thank yous, I got a question personally. I have heard from crowdfunding that you need to have an amount of money already funded for crowdfunding to work, that you can't start at crowdfunding at zero, that you need to have something like 25% of your funding secured for crowdfunding to take off. Is that something that you've experienced, or would you say that applies to other fields of crowdfunding rather than self-publishing as an industry?
I haven't experienced that for when I crowdfunded the debutante. Maybe it's a new thing that's been, because we started in 2019. I wonder if that's a relatively new thing. I think Kickstarter is becoming more popular as well because it's easier to offer people who donate to the cause rewards, so you could offer them like an issue of the magazine or whatever. But no, I didn't know that. That's interesting, Caitlin.
I would just add that there are so many different platforms to use for crowdfunding. this could be an entire other creative circle for future reference, that you want to research really well with the crowdfunding, what percentage they take and that kind of thing. But I've done crowdfunds before starting with 0, so it's doable.
That's good to hear. I think it was in more of like a tech startup world, so you know, differences. So then we have a couple of questions, one from Andrew, who says, a quick question about self-publishing his first book. Sorry, presumed he, sorry about that. Should I use a copyright statement at the start or elsewhere, and is there a standardized format for this kind of thing?
Oh, really good question. Yeah, we've got a copyright statement in the debutante, and I think there is a standard format for this kind of thing. I'm not sure what it is off the top of my head, but this is the thing about self-publishing. You sort of learn everything as you go. But yeah, I would recommend including a copyright statement.
And did you like get that seen by lawyers, or do you just, it's enough to just say it?
No, I think it's enough to just say it.
Another question is, do you recommend multiple platforms for ebooks, and if so, which ones? Apologies, complete newbie to this, but as are most of us, I think.
Ebooks, I haven't published an ebook, so I'm not sure on that question, I have to admit.
But we will say, don't use Amazon, because Amazon is the devil and is killing independent art.
And I think a lot of people do go to Amazon. Like, I think that's the largest marketplace for self-publishing that people tend to know about, and especially like in certain genres. It is like, especially like something like self-help or whatever, they thrive on Amazon, and people are like, 5 tips to succeed in your career, and you know, there's also an element of scamming going on there, you know, when people say that you should write an ebook and sell it, or even like I forget who it was, there's a guy called Folding Ideas on YouTube who did a great look into ebook scamming, and how like the idea is that you pay underpaid writers to write an ebook, and you aren't even yourself writing it, and then you like publish, and it was all like, so there is that sort of stuff going on just to like be aware of in this field.
And I think the thing about Amazon as well is that you're not just even a drop in the ocean in Amazon, you're a drop in a very dirty, polluted ocean, and you're far less likely to be successful in this huge, you know, international platform, as opposed to doing something meaningful on a smaller scale in a local area, or in a, you know.
Yeah, I think you have to really think about what the purpose of your publication or whatever your self-publishing is. Like, is it to, if you want to make a lot of money, then maybe commercial routes are good for you. But if you want to make really meaningful connections with your community who are also interested in the same thing, then you don't have to go down the Amazon route. You can go the indie route and like make connections with your local bookshops and stuff. And I think that's valuable.
And there are so many little niche publishers now who, like, you know, there are publishers who just do horror, or there are publishers who just do queer work, or, you know, so there are more options now if you look outside the box. Yeah. And
one last question, to Rachel, is there anything you would advise self-publishing writers not to do? Anything that might not be helpful in getting yourself off to a good start?
I would say that you should always hire a proofreader before you self-publish. An editor in addition would be ideal, but I wouldn't put your work out into the world before you've had someone professional to check it and pay them for their time, of course.
And you are talking about hiring and professional, not a friend, you know.
Yeah, obviously you can get your mum or dad to read, whoever you like, pal, to read it as well. That's always good, but yeah, professional proofreader is ideal.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's been fascinating talk. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Marianne and Emma.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.